Hey, it's me. The one who's seen you at your worst. It was me who came knocking after you OD'd in your friend's dorm room. Me who was there when your car hydroplaned on the highway and traded paint with the center divider. And yeah, also me, who held on to you after your grandma flatlined on that old craggy carpet of hers. I understand, this is my job, to be on call for you whenever you need me, and honestly, I'm grateful to have landed a job that gives my life some purpose. Lately though, after over 25 years of serving this community as a first responder, my relationship to the work I do has changed. Now, I'm the one in need of your help. I want you to know how difficult this is for me, to admit that I can't take this on alone. As I'm sure you guessed, I'm not all that in touch with my feelings and stuff. If I have a bad day, maybe I lost someone I tried to save, I'll go down to my basement and punch a bag till my knuckles crack and bleed, which is exactly what my dad did all the way up until his heart gave out. Look, I'm not the most evolved guy you'll meet, but I can jam a trash tube in your throat before your lungs even know what happened to your upper airway. If this was as easy as pumping air to a failing organ, I wouldn't even be here. I guess that's the appeal of this chat room, or whatever the hell you're supposed to call this place. I've been reading some of the posts, and it seems this is where people go to work through something they have no way of coping with on their own. I'm glad I found you here. The first time it came for me was on a night shift. There's a reason I only work days. You can't imagine the stuff I've seen while you were sleeping. But on that night, I was covering for a buddy who was out on a much-needed vacation. She got dispatched to an NHR, or no head remaining, 2 of those in 1 week. So she wasn't sleeping at all, which was starting to impact her ability to care about anything. She needed a break, so I gave it to her. I got to base early and checked in with the senior paramedic of the day crew, who caught me up to speed on how the city was flowing that day. You can always get a sense for how your shift is going to go based on how it went for those you're relieving. If they had a light shift, expect yours to be heavy as hell. It's weird, but the scale of life always balances itself out like that. I knew I was going in for it, cause the senior medic still had enough juice to land some jokes about my Jacksonville Jaguars. If somebody's in the mood to joke about passing yards after a shift, they've had a pretty damn good day. So yeah, I knew I was screwed the moment I clocked in. After day crew cleared out, I stood alone in the back of the ambulance, looking out of our station at the city streets. The sun dropped behind the buildings, and the lights of the buildings switched on. The air chilled. My breath turned to clouds. Sirens whined somewhere in the distance. The city was waking up, pulling back its jowls, exposing fangs. It was quiet for a while. A senior citizen fell on the steps of his porch, only shattering his wrist. A woman delivered a healthy baby in the liquor store of a strip mall. A driver pulled over her bus after experiencing a wave of nausea, an early sign of heart failure, caught just in time. It felt like we were lucking out all over the place, which only heightened my anticipation that something bad and mad and brutal was coming for us on a black horse. We were heading back to base when the call came in. The dispatcher was dealing with several conflicting reports of an accident that was either a hit and run, a major fender bender, or a multiple car pileup. Whenever there's confusion at a scene like that, you know you're about to step into a full-on hurricane. I did my best to mentally prepare for any eventuality, like I'd done 1,000 times over, but never in my life could I have been ready for what was coming. It took us about 20 minutes to get out to the 2-lane highway that cuts through the agriculture district just outside of town. Traffic was backed up for nearly a mile from the site of the accident, so we were hauling it on the dirt beside the paved road. We could tell we were getting close when the drivers were standing outside their cars, waving us through. The first thing we came across was the headlights of an old steel truck that had been spun around so it was facing us. Our driver slowed to a stop, and we both looked out at the truck. There was a massive dent in the driver's side door, like it had collided with a metal fist. The windshield was smashed and webbed, most likely from someone's head, but there was no one inside. Our driver chirped the siren and started to edge us around the truck into the oncoming lane of traffic, and that's when I could see that up ahead there was a group of people standing in the middle of the road, all huddled together, a bundled mass motionless at their feet. We stopped right there in the middle of the road, jumped out, and started to gather our equipment from the back of the ambulance. I wiped the cold sweat off my forehead. My heart felt jumpy. Something was coming. I was sure of it. I knew my partner could feel it too, but neither of us said anything, just the sound of our gear as we quickly assembled it all. A man suddenly emerged from the dark, staggering over to us. There was an open wound on the side of his head, blood leaking down his bearded face and neck onto his worn leather jacket. His lips were gray, color drained, and he shook as he tried to speak. "I fell asleep, I did. It was me, my fault. God, please don't let her be dead." "Sit down," I said, motioning to the back of the ambulance. "You've lost a lot of blood. You need to take a seat before you pass out." I helped him to the rear fender of our ambulance. He didn't resist. In a moment like this, where someone is knocked off the rails of their life, all they want is some direction. While my partner examined the man's head, I grabbed my equipment box and hustled over to the crowd that had gathered in the road ahead. It's not in my job description to decide who gets help and who doesn't. When I arrive at the scene of an accident, I erase any idea of good guys and bad guys, victims and perpetrators. There's only the living and the dead, and it's my job to save as many as I can before the clock runs out. That's the code I live by. All of us do. As I approached the group, I could make out a young woman motionless on the ground. Some of those hovering above her were crying. They must have thought she was already dead. I pushed a young couple aside, dropped down to my knees, and quickly assessed the situation. Her body was broken all over, blood pooling on the pavement behind her head. Her eyes were wide open, static, but her chest was still moving, breath sawing in and out. I was running through countless scenarios, but remained calm, always calm. "Ma'am," I said. Her eyes blinked once, twice, then they rolled over and locked onto mine. I could see the gash on the side of her head, where a lot of blood was leaking from. There could be internal trauma, of course, but I knew I would need to treat the head wound first. "I'm a paramedic. I'm going to help you." I reached for her wrist to take her pulse, but she flinched, pulling her hand away from mine as far as she could. She shook her head back and forth, I looked down at her, confused. "She won't let any of us help," someone said from the crowd above me. She continued to roll her head back and forth, indicating she was refusing medical assistance, RMA. My worst nightmare. I held my hands out where she could see them. I didn't have long to change her mind. "You're in a life-threatening situation. I need you to act quickly. Let me help you." She stared up at me, unblinking. Tears released from her eyes as she shook her head again. "Do something," someone yelled down at me, as if I wasn't saying the same thing to myself. "I can't. Not if she refuses," I said to no one. "Ma'am, please let me help you." Time slowed. Sound faded. Just me and this dying woman. Everything else was gone. Life continued to leak from her body onto the pavement, pooling around my knees. The red light from the ambulance rolled over her body like the tide. Her face was liquid, features distorted. She didn't look like herself anymore. She looked like someone else. Someone I knew. A flash of recognition, just long enough to burn the image in my brain forever. My partner's hand was suddenly on my shoulder. He was telling me she was gone. The bystanders had left too. I was kneeling alone above this dead woman for God knows how long. I failed her. At least, that's how it felt while we waited for the coroner to relieve us. When I got home, I punched the bag in my basement, but no matter how hard I hit it, my knuckles refused to bleed. I couldn't get the release I needed, so I slugged a six-pack and laid down on the couch in front of ESPN until my eyes were heavy enough to close on their own. I had lost others, sure, but none that had refused my help like that. What was she doing out in the middle of the night on the side of a random highway, wanting to die? I knew I'd never find out, or at least I'd never find an answer that would satisfy me. All I could think of was her face, that twisted, shifty look on her face that reminded me of, well, it reminded me of you. In the darkness, I heard the whine of a siren. Sometimes I hear sirens in my dreams, so I couldn't tell if I was awake or not at first. I opened my eyes and I could still hear it, so I was definitely not dreaming. But then, why was the TV off? I didn't remember doing that. I rubbed my eyes. My forehead was cold to the touch. The whole room was freezing. Had I forgotten to turn the heater on? That wasn't like me. I was in this surreal twilight space, drifting through the thick darkness of my house, when I saw a red light flashing in my bedroom. I stepped in my room, red light bouncing off the walls, disorienting me. I thought there must be an ambulance outside my house, with how hard it was hitting the walls of my room. I moved to the window, not to check on things, my shift was done, but to shut the blackout curtains and go back to sleep. I took a step towards the window and froze. The curtains were already drawn. The strobing light wasn't coming from outside. Where else? I couldn't tell. The light was everywhere, bouncing off every surface, blinding me. I shielded my eyes, turned my back for the door. All of it too much. And that's when I saw my shadow projected on the wall, and another one standing there beside it. I flipped around and there she was, the dead woman. She stood there in my bedroom, motionless, as the light continued to flash all around her. I couldn't move. I felt 1,000,000 miles above my body. I stared at her and she stared back, After an eternity, she opened her mouth to speak. But it was your voice I heard. Let me go. The sound shook me. I staggered back. When I looked at her again, she had your face. I knew I must be in some delusional state, but still, you were there, standing so close to me. Charlie? We named you after your Aunt Charlotte. She was the greatest sister you could ask for. Genuine, stubborn, fiercely loyal, unapologetically herself. You never got to meet her, because by the time your mother was in her 3rd trimester, Charlotte was undergoing her 7th round of chemo. She died, not wanting to die, fighting for every breath. I never told you where you got your name, because I wasn't ready to tell you about the part of life that can gut you to your core. I wanted to protect you from so much of what I saw every day on this job. I was there for you even when you said you didn't need me. I thought I was saving you. I had no idea I was pushing you away. Not until you told me in that letter you left me, the night you ran away from home. Even our worst days together, when you were pushing the limits I was trying to enforce, I'd trade any of those for the absence I have now that you're gone. I looked for you everywhere, never knowing if one day you'd be on the other side of an emergency. And finally, one night, that call came in. Don't leave, I said timidly. Your face was dark now, featureless, a silhouette against the strobing light. A sudden burst of light filled the room. When I could see again, the room was empty. You were gone. You've come for me every night since, with the same request. Let me go. And every time, I beg for you to stay. The paramedic at the station who had seen the severed heads is now filling in for me. I haven't been on another shift since the night I first saw you. I thought I might find you here, living in this space with all the other lost souls. Maybe if I reached you here, I could explain why I couldn't let you go. I saved your life, Charlie. Now, I need you to save mine.